BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
You're listening to Front Row with John Wilson.
Now, Aubrey Beardsley was an artist ahead of his time, one whose elegant, romantic, often erotic ink drawings sent shockwaves through Victorian society. His work was full of vitality, and yet from a very young age, Beardsley knew his days were numbered. Draw fast, die young could have been the motto of a man whose career as an artist and illustrator lasted for just 6 years. He died of tuberculosis at 25. Aubrey Beardsley is the subject of a major exhibition that opened at Tate Britain this week, and there's a forthcoming BBC4 documentary in which actor and writer Mark Gatiss, who's here with us of course, pays tribute to his artistic hero. In it, he takes us back to the first major retrospective of Beardsley's work in 1966 at the V&A in London, which caused a sensation.
But what isn't so well known is that after that landmark exhibition opened here, the Vice Squad raided a nearby bookshop after complaints that it was selling copies of Beardsley's risque Salome drawings for £1 a pop. But when quizzed by the coppers, the bookseller replied that he could see nothing wrong with it, as the originals were on display up the road. The police then came here to the V&A to interview the director, Sir Trenchard Cox, who assured them, over a cup of tea, that Beardsley was art and not pornography. The police went quietly on their way.
Mark, the documentary is a very personal response to Beardsley. When did you first come across him, and what was the appeal?
As a teenager, definitely, and I think through Oscar Wilde, as many people did, you know.
Because he illustrated Salome.
Yes, and that was his sort of major break. But as many people did, Wilde is such a sort of, he's like a great big sort of burning sun, and if you get into him as a teenager, as so many people do, you then notice all these other planets orbiting him, and I can't remember exactly how it happened, but I just became instantly obsessed with these extraordinary drawings, and then you see the person behind them, then the life and the doomed romance of the sort of...
Well, let's start with the drawings. For those who don't know Aubrey Beardsley, I mean, I would advise people to head straight down to Tate Britain, where there is a really extensive show, but they are very distinctive, instantly recognisable, monochrome ink outlines and very, very fine detail. So on one hand, they're simple and then very detailed. How do you rate him as an artist?
Well, there's a wonderful story. He had this strange habit, which I can come on to, but I think he was really just incredibly young. It's easy to forget. He had about 5 different phases of career in a tiny amount of time. He died so young. But he actually is just a very young man. He's very arrogant, incredibly self-publicising and sort of brilliant at it. But he sort of falls out with all these heroes straight away. Burne-Jones, Oscar Wilde, and Whistler, who he thought was brilliant. They just didn't get on. And then right towards the end, Whistler was very dismissive of him. They met again in France, and he happened to have a portfolio of his drawings. Whistler looked at them, went through them, and then just said, "I have made a very great mistake, Aubrey. You are a very great artist." And Beardsley broke down. It was terribly moving. But it's easy to forget because of the sort of sensation around him and the scandal and everything. Yeah. I think he was a genius. And there is no one like Beardsley. He had incredible imitators and he's left an amazing legacy. But his mastery of line is absolutely amazing. And he goes from being an insurance clerk and an amateur to being an absolutely extraordinary professional within the space of about 6 months. And then he changes his style constantly. He's like Madonna. That's not too old a reference now.
But he packs so much in, and it was a very short life. He died at 25, diagnosed with tuberculosis at the age of 7, and he had this major attack at, 17, 18. What effect did that death sentence, which really is what he was living under, what effect did that have on the work, do you think?
I think, there's lots of wonderful stories about it. He was seen running through town in the middle of winter without an overcoat on, and a friend berated him. He said, "I don't need one, I am always burning." And I think he meant both physically and, artistically. He's on fire. And he knew he didn't have long, so he just packs it in. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're a genius. A lot of people probably get a sentence like that and think, I might just go on holiday. But he decides, he devotes himself to it. He works incredibly hard. And he changes his style. It's just, he gets this amazing opportunity to illustrate the Morte d'Arthur, Thomas Mallory. It's a major thing, hundreds of drawings. But he gets bored so quickly. He starts changing his style. whilst doing the commission. And by
Yes.
the time it's finished, his drawings are totally different, So I think it must have affected extraordinary. And there are moments, despite his sort of levity and his dandified pose, where he's clearly frightened. But I think...
Well, he knew time was running out, so he had to pack it all in.
And it's hard to know from this distance whether, it was a romantic disease, but people did live longer. I don't think he knew until quite late on he was absolutely not going to last.
And it was consumption at the time, wasn't it?
Yes.
I just realised that Rachel Regan, the other night you were on stage, you started coughing, you said, "Oh, I've got consumption."
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's an Austin
It's still
reference
very
as well.
romantic.
It's so romantic, La Bohème.
We see images of him. He was captured by other artists. There's an amazing Walter Sickert
the Sickert's the best
painting,
thing.
which is in your documentary. It's also there in Tate Britain. Absolutely amazing. And he's there captured. He's tall, skinny, drawn, hollow cheeked, spectral in a way. Does that give us an idea of the sort of man he was as well?
Yes, that
His
painting
personality
is apparently inspired by Sickert seeing him at a memorial to Keats, with whom he identified strongly. He also died at 25 of TB. And
sort of turning and looking back over his shoulder.
yeah, but he was picking his way through the gravestones, and his shoes were apparently just thick with wet mud. And it's just the most brilliant picture. He looks like a stick of charcoal, doesn't he? But he was he's a very gregarious person, very funny, I think. And he looks, but there's something impish about him. And he took great care with his dress. And as I say, his pose,
he's a dandy, isn't he?
Dandy, but he sort of just manufactured himself. He was rarely seen, as it were, because he spent most of his life indoors in bed, and so he sort of rationed his appearances, I think, and then made a huge impact. What is amazing is that he absorbs his influences so quickly.
Burne-Jones in particular,
and then the Japanese influence, but then he just does something new with them straight away. And there's no real evidence of him being very witty before he became an acolyte of Wilde, but then he did. It was like he's a very funny man, but he seems to have sort of absorbed everything from Wilde and then go, no, I'm going to do it my way now. So
great diversity of style in the work, as you say, and some of them are very funny and very sexy and erotic, but there's also a nightmarish quality. There's that recurring image of the fetus, which must, I guess, at the end of the 19th century, it must have been really shocking to have seen that, often sort of hidden as a kind of Easter egg. Again, what does that sort of obsession tell us about
Nobody knows.
Beardsley?
There's
Is
all
that a
kinds
mystery?
all kinds of stories about that. What it is, and what appealed to me immediately as a 15-year-old, is it's unhealthy. Everything about him, from his lungs onwards, is very unhealthy. I bought a book of his drawings when I was about 15, and from a quiet bookshop in Darlington. I remember getting my parents picking me up, and I was sitting in the back, and of course my mum said, "What have you bought?" I didn't know, and of course it immediately opened on the infamous Lysistrata drawings of these
giant penises.
Giant penises. And I just sat there with beads of sweat forming. And my mum said, he died of TB, didn't he? And I said, yes. She said, oh, it must have been his glands. So there was something so unhealthy about the whole thing. And
you can't avoid the sexual element of the work, though, can you? And there's even, if you go to Tate Britain, there's a dedicated gallery where some of the ruder work is there. Was he setting out to shock, or was he exploring his own sexuality there, do you think? Which there was a kind of ambiguity as well, wasn't there?
He's an extraordinarily ambiguous figure. He sort of... I mean, as a youth, I desperately wanted him to be gay, and he sort of wasn't. He definitely had a mistress, Yeats, W.B. Yeats.
Was there no anecdotal evidence? We don't know about his sexuality then.
No, Yeats said he had a mistress, and he knocked around with tarts. But then he has this late sort of friendship with Andrei Rafalovich, who is extremely gay, and you just don't know whether he was exploring something. He looks at himself in the mirror in Yeats's house and says, I look like a sodomite, but I am not one. And so I don't know, but he's simultaneously exploring it and also slightly exploiting. The press said he was sexless, and yet at the same time his work is sort of throbbing with sex. So it's a strange ambiguity, and I think that's really still part of his appeal. You just really can't pin him down.
Absolutely. And very briefly, I mean, we see his influence very much in sort of the dandy image in the 60s and that cover of the Beatles' Revolver album, and the legacy lives on in that way. Has he been a direct influence on you, do you think, in your work?
Oh God, I don't know. I tried to draw like him all the time when I was a kid. And I think one of the brilliant things about making this documentary is sort of rediscovering him. And as I was saying, he's not just the sort of poster boy for bedroom decadence. He really is a genius.
And a great artist. Well, as Whistler said, then he is, isn't he? Mark Gatiss, thanks very much indeed. Mark's documentary Scandal and Beauty, Aubrey Beardsley, is on BBC4 at the end of the month, and the Aubrey Beardsley exhibition is at Tate Britain until the 25th of May. Thanks for listening to Front Row this evening, presented by me, John Wilson, and produced by Sarah Johnson. If you'd like to download Front Row as a podcast series, head to BBC Sounds.